For a very long time now, a big growing discussion around XRP has always been Ripple replacing SWIFT, tapping into XRP for the movement of all the money that used to move over SWIFT, which is in, of course, the trillions of dollars. And that's going to make XRP worth, this dollar amount, that dollar amount. And, again, although it's very easy to just say, all right, well, this is how much money moves over SWIFT. Let's just calculate that by multiplying it by the supply of XRP. And voila, we have our massive price prediction for XRP. But the thing is that that's not how it actually works. That's not how we get to, this dollar amount or that dollar amount for XRP. Although, yes, I do think that if something like that did happen, XRP would be extremely valuable. I think that a lot of people are actually overlooking how this would all morph into reality. And in this video, I actually want to go over the truths behind this and how we actually get to that point where, SWIFT is tapping into Ripple and these two are actually combining their strength. So welcome to the channel, everyone. My name is Nick. For those that are new to the channel, hopefully by the end of this video, you do become a subscriber. So if we dive on in to this post here for myself, actually going all the way back to September of 2023, I stated that if SWIFT really wants to retain its role in the global economy, it needs to start collaborating with private players like Ripple. MasterCard CEO mentioned how SWIFT could be phased out in the next 5 years. Remember the quote, adapt or die. The world is changing and these global giants need to start planning their next move strategically. Now, yes, when we think about these networks, these public networks that are, basically the backbone of the financial system, they also need to upgrade their systems, just like banks with like ISO 20022, for an example. These are mandated upgrades. Now with SWIFT, SWIFT does need to adapt or die because we already know how inefficient it is to send money across the world, with SWIFT being like the backbone of all of that. But see, this is where a lot of people kind of get confused because they're like, all right, well, if SWIFT has all these connections, they have 11,000 big banks tied to them, and they're the global, system of the financial world, wouldn't they just create a new project similar to Ripple and XRP and just call it a day? And Matt Hamilton, actually, which is a previous Ripple employee, already debunked this back in 2022. He said that SWIFT did attempt to do something like that. It was using Corda IRC, but their main takeaway was this doesn't work without a public token. And this is in response to somebody saying, like, do you think a copycat XRP ledger has been tried by the large banks? It doesn't matter if they try. The thing about, XRP that makes XRP extremely valuable in my mind and very unique is the fact that it is decentralized and it's an open, ledger. Anyone can tap into it. If you want to use the XRP ledger today, no matter where you are in the world, you can. Anyone can use it. Nobody is sitting here guarding the XRP ledger from you using it, which is what really kind of sets the stage for, crypto networks to actually be a driving force around, escaping, if you will, the SWIFT system. Like, because even when we look at Russia, their main thing was to escape the SWIFT system because of the sanctions. When we think about that, they could easily tap into the XRP ledger if they wanted to for transactions. But the big question here is, you want to get out of the crypto sphere as well. If you were like a player like Russia, for an example, because you would make the deal in, trade or whatever the case may be, it could be even payments. You would make the trade and then you would want to take those profits and get it into like a bank account or, extract the value from the space. And you can't really do that if you are sanctioned by like almost every single big bank. But beyond that, you could still transact and you could still make payments and things like that on the XRP ledger no matter what. And this is where we think about walled gardens. Now, walled gardens have always been talked about, but the main thing here is that SWIFT does need a public token. And that's why we're actually starting to see SWIFT become more and more vocal on digital assets. Even back in January of this year, they did say that the emergence of digital assets has the potential to create new, innovative, and effective ways of trading securities. But despite the promise, the tokenization landscape remains fragmented, limiting its scalability and broad adoption, meaning we still need interoperability. Interoperability is the main key here. But this actually also reminds me of a few things that we heard from Ripple from SWIFT even back in like November of last year. And I immediately thought about Ripple because we have here from Subjective Views, an area that we are very much focused on is how our network can be used to exchange and transfer tokenized value across public and private blockchains, as well as to interlink CBDCs globally. This is Javier Perez Tasso from SWIFT. This is SWIFT's CEO. And they're literally telling you and talking about, exchanging and transferring tokenized value within public and private blockchains, as well as to interlink CBDCs. SWIFT, by the way, check it out.
90% of SWIFT payments today reach the beneficiary bank within an hour, putting the in-flight time well within the G20 goals. And as an industry, we can go even further. Having ISO 222 across the community will drive a major uplift in data quality, which is an essential component for an even better end client experience, but as well, stronger compliance and, of course, innovation. Innovation that is rapidly accelerating here in Asia, as in other parts of the world, where we're seeing big advancements in technologies and business models that, face it, are truly transforming the landscape. Because the reality is, in the future, there will be many more ways to move value, not fewer. And people will demand more choice, not less. So an area that we're very much focused on is how our network can be used to exchange, to transfer tokenized value across public and private blockchains, as well as to interlink CBDCs globally, with SWIFT as a single window, creating an end-to-end tracking, transparency, traceability, and trust across all transactions.
Now, why do I immediately think about Ripple here in the XRP ledger? Well, because again, we think about public blockchains. We think about, what public blockchain is more suited for the job than the XRP ledger. Also, think about what Ripple has stated on many occasions. SWIFT is just a messaging network. They don't clear and they don't settle. So they tap into third parties for settlement and, clearing. And that's where we start to see, Ripple get the spotlight shined on them, right? Because if we think about it, what better player to clear and settle those transactions than Ripple? Because the second that we have that collaboration in place, all of a sudden SWIFT is now, in the future of payments. They immediately get streamlined into the future of payments. And this has been documented many times over in the past as well. This is actually from April 16th from Smoke Dog. We have blockchain plus ISO 2022, July 2025 and November of 2025. Keys to success. Banks and financial institutions need to take a holistic view in addressing these challenges through modern technology. Employing secure API integrations, blockchain technology, and enhanced biometric verification helps to secure or ensure a secure, compliant, and reliable payment transformation, ultimately turning risk management into a strategic advantage. And then we have on the bottom there, ISO 2022 is slated to become the standard across U.S. financial services in July of 2025 this year, and required for cross-border payments via SWIFT starting in November of this year as well. So when we think about this, right, we go up here, which is April of 2025, major confirmation. SWIFT is officially integrating DLT-based products into the ISO 2022 messaging standard by Q4 of this year. And this is the quote, right? A key initiative to promote interoperability and facilitate automation of issuance, trading, settlement, and distribution, both of traditional debt securities as well as DLT-based securities, is ICMA's bond data taxonomy. And in addition, ICMA has partnered with SWIFT to integrate the BDT into the ISO 2022 messaging standard. This is becoming widely adopted by financial institutions across capital markets for trading, settlement, payments, and reporting processes. This initiative was launched in Q1 and is expected to be completed by Q4 of this year. And this is all documented here, as you guys can see. This is the ICMA's response to HMT's and the UK DMO's announcement of preliminary market engagement exercise for the digital gilt instrument pilot. And this is where they do break that down. Again, this is all tied back to the DLT ICMA DLT bonds working group, which includes issuers, banks, investors, market infrastructures, law firms, data providers, as well as technology providers across the spectrum of international debt capital markets. And we can see all of their developments here on this list as well. But then outside of that, we also have over here, the key initiative, I just read this, But I also read this one down here as well. But we have what steps should be taken by the private sector to support greater DLT adoption. And ultimately, when we are really kind of looking at this, we're just really kind of looking at DLT and blockchain-based companies, becoming more connected with these big players. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't think that Ripple has to do much, to have their entire stack adopt it, which also means that the XRP ledger and XRP would be adopted. But again, we're still thinking about SWIFT here. And what does SWIFT have to do with this? Well, number one, they're confirming that they are integrating DLT-based products into the ISO 22 messaging standard, which also tells us that they are ready to tap into public and private blockchains, just like we heard from their CEO. But on top of that, we also know that it is documented that, yes, SWIFT can easily integrate their messaging standards into Ripple. We have here regulatory bodies like the Federal Reserve will continue to set and enforce regulatory standards. Messaging standards like SWIFT can be easily integrated into Ripple as well. And what's crazy about that is we also go over here to Crypto Aries' recent post. This is RippleNet kind of SWIFT update or replacement. This is Eric Van Miltenberg, SVP of Strategic Initiatives at Ripple. Check this out.
We're providing infrastructure in the form of a messaging product, kind of a SWIFT update or replacement. Since then, we work with our customers. We make sure we're compliant. I think that's obviously a critical part of the infrastructure that we need to keep very much top of mind. And we move at their pace. Sometimes that's very frustrating when you're dealing with large traditional financial institutions, but the speed at which they want to operate and iterate and innovate is increasing dramatically.
So yeah, I mean, listen, when we are thinking about, SWIFT and we're thinking about replacements of SWIFT or, Ripple becoming the new SWIFT, we immediately think about the past because we know in the past we have heard very high level conversations from individuals from Ripple. For an example, we even look at David Schwartz, right? This is recent. We want to create a payment network like SWIFT, but one where the settlement and the actual movement of money, the actual plumbing underneath the surface would be a decentralized open network. And that's what I mean, right? Like anyone can tap into the XRP ledger, which is why that, openness of the ledger is so important. The end game is just money moving invisibly as easy as information. And even if we go back, we can go all the way back to 2017. If SWIFT wants to fix payments for us, that's great. It's one less thing we have to do. This is from Anderson. Payments equals messaging. XRP equals settlement, actual movement of funds. Have you figured out what's happening yet? And yeah, because, again, they're not trying to kill SWIFT. They're not trying to replace SWIFT. Like if SWIFT wanted to, work with Ripple, they could immediately sign a deal tomorrow. And it would make a lot of sense. And even Brad Garlinghouse recently stated, on Fox, big shout out to RizXRP for this one, the wordplay has always been intriguing. Modernizing SWIFT network Trump effect. This is from Ripple. This is Brad Garlinghouse talking about SWIFT. Listen closely.
The market opportunity here is massive. You have trillions of dollars flowing cross-border globally. It's still largely dominated by the SWIFT network, if you will. And that's architecture, that's a technology architecture that was developed 50 years ago. There's an opportunity to modernize. That takes time, particularly when you have a government in the US kind of combating that innovation. But that's changing now. The Trump effect, if you will, is profound. You're seeing that in asset prices, but you're also going to see that in the adoption of these technologies.
And again, yes, SWIFT needs to modernize, right? This is antiquated technology. And when we're thinking about that, we are also analyzing, all right, well, what kind of impact would this have? If this did, get announced tomorrow that SWIFT was tapping into Ripple to, use XRP and the XRPL for transactions. Like, first off, think about how big that announcement would be. Second off, think about how much volume and value would be immediately transacted over Ripple with XRP. And then, of course, we think about the value in which XRP would be worth. All of those things, they're questions that we just don't actually have the answer to today. Because, number one, we know about the network effects. Bitcoin has experienced it. And we already know where Bitcoin is worth today just through network effects. For something like this, first off, it would make XRP extremely valuable. We know that. We know that that would be a massive announcement, but the question is will this happen? And in my opinion, I do believe that it will. It makes so much sense. Ripple has been tied back to Swift many times over. On top of that, a lot of the partners that Ripple does have, like Volante, for an example, have direct ties to Swift. So if Swift was actually serious about tapping into public and private blockchains, and if they were actually serious about moving value and innovating completely and upgrading their 50-year antiquated, technology, then they would be tapping into something like Ripple and the XRP ledger. And I do think that this is something that very much so will happen. We don't know when, but we know that we have the date in front of us. We have the timeline in which we have to focus on, which is, Q4 of this year. By Q4 of this year, everything will look completely different. And I'm not just talking about price action. I'm talking about the stablecoin market, the tokenization of things, adoption. The biggest players out there are already talking about, tapping into crypto in a huge way. So Swift, when we think about Swift, they've already told us on multiple occasions that they're ready. They want to tap into digital assets. They want to utilize digital assets. They want to tap into tokenization. The DTCC, for an example, is another big name. But when we think about this, we think about public and private blockchains. We think about, the fact that you can't just tap into a private blockchain. You need interoperability. You can't have something that's a closed walled garden. So we think about XRP. We think about Ripple because for the last, you could argue 10 years, the conversation around Ripple and XRP has always been, yeah, they're going to replace Swift. I don't think that's about replacing Swift. I think it's about upgrading Swift using Ripple and XRP. And I think that this is where the real fun actually begins. So with that being said, I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. If you guys did, definitely leave a like, subscribe, turn notifications on because I'm more free content. You guys are more than welcome to follow me on Twitter and join the free Discord in the description below. And with that being said, guys, this has been Nick. Thanks for watching. Peace out.